Hey 10th grade, welcome back to another video on our YouTube channel and Google Classroom. A couple weeks ago, we talked about how to defend a stance in persuasive writing. Today, we're going to take it a step further. We'll be talking about how to use and find evidence in order to support that stance and make it really, really persuasive. Let's start with a question. What exactly counts as strong evidence or support for my stance? If you remember from the lesson a couple weeks ago, we did an activity that took 3 topics, and in those 3 topics you had to choose a stance and write 3 very strong reasons why you believe that stance to be the correct one. Those 3 topics were: is Arsenal the greatest team on the planet? Is Google beneficial to student learning? Is COT good or bad for Somaliland? Whichever side you took, I'm sure you had very good reasons for it. Today, though, I want you to find and circle the strongest for each and write a 2-sentence reason why you believe. At the end of this exercise, you should have 3 reasons circled and at least 6 full sentences. Let's take a moment and try it. Well, I also did some homework from last time, and I took the Google opinion. Let's see what I did with it. After a long time thinking, deliberating, I've come to the conclusion that Google is not good for student learning. But teacher, why, you may ask? It has so many great sources of information. That may be true, but this is my opinion, remember. And I will back it up with pieces of information or evidence. Let's see what I got. The reasons I don't think Google is good for student learning are as follows. 1. A quick search for answers involves very little academic rigor. 2. With answers so easily at our fingertips, we don't have any motivation to remember what we looked up. And finally, Google searches are very limited and are not always the best. Notice how that, in combination with my stance and my 3 reasons, I'm pretty well set up for at least an outline. Here I have a good thesis statement and enough for 3 topic sentences. But that's not enough to convince my reader. I'm going to have to break each of my topic sentences down even further, providing evidence to back them up. Let's take a look at the first one. A quick search for answers involves little academic rigor. It's a good statement, but I need to back it up or strengthen it. And what are some ways that I could do that? Well, I could provide a hypothetical example. I could provide a real-life example. I could cite an authority, or I could cite research. Don't think that you have to be limited to just one of these 4, though. Where and whenever you can combine them, you should. Alright, let's check out a hypothetical example that I have. My full topic sentence will look like, a Google search is not helpful to students because Google searches require little academic rigor. The example I have for you is not a real example, but it is something that you can imagine to happen. That's what hypothetical is. When students are asked a question for homework, often their first step is typing the question, word for word, into a search engine. The crucial step of critical inquiry is bypassed, and the student is left as merely an automation for typing questions and copying down answers. As you can see, You can imagine this to be very true, and it is an acceptable piece of evidence. Another acceptable piece of evidence is what we call anecdotal evidence, or things from personal experience or real life. Let's check one out. I've seen this firsthand. Students in a 12th grade English class were asked to consider a question about Frankenstein's monster as homework. The next day, many of them found that they had nearly identical views because they had merely typed the question into a search engine and read out the first three results. In this case, students had bypassed the expectation that they engage in critical thinking to come up with their own ideas. Google search made this all too easy. But if stories and anecdotes aren't enough, why don't we ask the pros? The last two, and often the strongest forms of evidence, are citing authority and citing evidence. For example, according to Tim Stellard, head of Tomorrow's Education Forum, Google search has offered quick answers to students at the cost of critical inquiry process. Now, this is not a real quote, but if you remember from our citations video, quotes are a little bit different, and you have to use these quotation marks and give credit. Similarly to research, it would look like this. Research conducted by the University of Michigan shows that search engine usage by students in high school has led to a decline in college readiness over the past 10 years. Once again, this was just a made-up example to show you guys what it would look like. Okay, now that we have about 4 really great ways to provide further evidence to back up our claim, let's look at our paragraph that we started with everything put together and see if you can be convinced. Why don't you take a moment now, pause the screen, and read the paragraph. All done? Okay, great. How was it? Pretty convincing, right? Yeah, I thought so too. Okay, remember that especially when it comes to persuasive writing, you really want to show your opinion, but also back it up with evidence, and that way your readers can be convinced, not just by what you say, but also by stories you've had, stories that maybe they might experience, and especially what the pros say. Why don't you try? Choose one of the reasons you circled in the opening exercise of this video. Find support for that reason, and use a variety of support. You may have to do some extra research for this one. Use your reason and support to write one or more paragraphs, as they might appear in an essay, with your fellow students, your teachers, as your audience. Great job today, guys. Remember that when writing persuasively and trying to convince people, during the research process, your opinion might change. It's not always a bad thing, though. It shows that you're engaging in the topic and keeping an open mind. The more you read and learn, the more likely you are to end up somewhere in the middle of two very clear opinions, or sides of an opinion. As you get used to this process, you will find it much easier to develop strong opinions that are grounded with evidence. Don't forget to check out the Google Classroom for your homework assignment for this week. Don't forget to keep studying, working hard on these competencies that you will need for when we return to school. Until next time, guys, goodbye.